Cedric, I was rereading your conclusion in After Black Lives Matter again before the show.
Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking about what I just wrote because I'm going to have to start doing, some appearances on it pretty soon. And I'm sure people are going to have some things to say.
Right.
Not too happy. Michael X is a big Spurs. There's something that you do bring up that with the rise of Black Lives Matter, we do start to look at policing different. And I think sometimes people get a little too dismissive of them. Do you think there's something that we should be looking at as a positive with BLM to some extent?
I mean, look, I think right now with the siege on Gaza, some of these BLM folks have been on the front lines, offering the criticism that we need. I know the people here in Chicago have been taking a lot of heat for their posts and for sharing, information about what's actually happening on the ground. And so, I think there's, that we can easily criticize the celebrities that have emerged as a result of BLM. But, they are activists and have always been activists even before BLM was a thing, who have been, fighting a good fight at the grassroots level, local level. And I'm careful not to reduce it all to the people we don't like. you know,
Well,
the
have you checked out Vincent Bevan's new book at all?
nah, I haven't.
Do you know who he is or?
Nah, I'm not up on it.
Okay, you
Who's
made it sound
this?
like y'all had beef at first. Like, nah, I ain't read Vince's book.
Which book is
like,
this?
like fuck. He wrote the book, The Jakarta Method, that was popular 2-3 years ago. He has a new book out, kind of about mass protests globally in the 2010s. I guess that was
Nah.
the most mass protests we've had globally, and he's pretty critical. I don't know the name of it. Do we know the name of it, Tucson?
I can pull it up.
It's a news show segment, Cedric's Beefs. I'm just kidding. It's called what now?
It's called If We Burn, The Mass Protest Decade and the Missing Revolution.
Oof.
Yeah.
I know you haven't read the book. I haven't read the book. I just heard him on a friend's podcast. He was on the Bunga Cast today, and they had a kind of a great conversation about that. I've had definitely some feelings about protests. Actually, our first conversation was during a lot of the George Floyd stuff, and I definitely had feelings about it even then. What do you think, just kind of off the top, about the 2010s and all these mass protests that we saw? Because not much really came of it.
Right. Yeah, I mean, so the quick thing. Let me say something critical about it, then something positive, right? So that would be the immediate thing. It's nothing really came of it. That this was, a lot of mobilization. In some cases unprecedented in size and scale. But a lot of decentralized, unfocused activity, right? So what was the end game? So we've had protests without necessarily having real left political parties or national organizations that could consolidate all of that energy into something that could win. So I think that's been the big problem, right? And there's an aversion to that, right? I mean, among many Americans and certainly many people on the left who don't really see state policy as a goal, right? We're not trying to capture state power. People are irritated when you can bring up those sorts of questions. So I think that's one of the problems. On the flip side, though, I mean, it's been better, seeing people who are out on the streets and becoming politicized. So maybe my most optimistic self would say that we have yet to see the implications of a lot of the protests and the activity that happened in the 2010s, and even in this last decade. So that would be the optimistic thing. Would be like, they may be this may be like putting seeds in the ground, right? You're not going to see them sprout up right away,
Hmm.
but perhaps you know this is all additive, right? That there are people who became politicized through Occupy, who are now much more committed to socialist politics than they were back when they first showed up for those demonstrations, right? There are people who became involved in Black Lives Matter who may not have had the maturity or the clarity that they needed, but as they participated over these last few years, they've moved in a different direction. So that's the professorial side of me that knows that I've watched, people come through my door who who don't have a politics, right, or who say things that are pretty backwards when you meet them, just like I did when I was the same age. But over time, come to some good places and some clarity. So that's the best that I could hope for. But I think it has been a lot of major protests without a whole lot of delivery of actual goods.
Do you think that sometimes these movements, and this is one of the things that Bevins talks about in the book, that sometimes it just get too large? And also media plays such a pivotal role now. And that's the reason why I wanted to make a whole feature-length documentary about the way we consume media.
Right.
Slightly different than Chomsky's book about media.
Manufacturing
It's,
consent.
it's a little, it's kind of along the same lines, but it's more about, for me personally, I think
Hmm.
it's a more contemporary lens on the way we dissect what we see and how we see what we see,
Right.
and
Right.
using the kayfabe theory,
Hmm.
which is something that's kind of always in motion. And for
Right.
kayfabe to even be working, you do need reality. So
Right.
it's not like there's a conspiracy theory and everybody's working, pulling strings. It's like, no, there's
Right.
real things that are happening in the world, but how are you presented? These protests. They brought up Brazil, and in 2013 there were these protests to make public transportation free, and it was led by anarchists and young, like, punks, like young leftists.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
and that whole movement kind of got co-opted by people that would later become Bolsonaristas.
Right.
Um, the way they handled like a nationalist sentiment of the people that came to protest, because the way the news was portraying it was like these people just mad about whatever.
Hmm.
Kind of the
Hmm.
way Occupy starts off as kind of an honest portrayal of the 99%, and then the reporting devolves into it's just homeless people and
Right.
ne'er-do-wells effing up the parks.
Right. Right. Yeah, I mean, look, here's another thing that always irks me about it. And I remember saying this to people back like in the 2010s, how much of this protesting actually translating into moving people who are not at the protests, right? So I think that's a
Mm.
bigger issue, right? Like, does it change the opinion of your uncle or the guys in the barbershop who never been to a protest, or the people you graduated high school with who went straight into the military, right? Does it change their opinions, or is this just sort of something that we do? A lot of people participate in it, but it doesn't really trickle, around or diffuse in a way that it affects other people, right? And I think that's the bigger issue because you can turn out a lot of young people to protest, right? I mean, in this day and age, especially with social media, you can turn people out to be upset about something. Um, but does it really translate into a politics that sticks, right? A politics that's about sustained engagement that goes beyond, the spectacle. And I think that ties in a lot to what you're saying about mass media, right? I mean, how much of protests in the age of after George Floyd is really about the Instagrammable moment more than it is about
Mm.
settling in with people, where you live, people you work with, folks you're connected to, people whose opinions might not be progressive, right? How much of it is about that? Like trying to impact that particular kind of environment. I don't think much of it, right? I think a lot of it is about we used to call them weekend warriors back during the war on terror period. The guy who jumps in the SUV with his big coffee and drives to the next protest, but doesn't really have much impact on the community he lives in, right? So I think that phenomenon is still with us.
Mm.
And I always use that when I'm talking to students, and activists and other people. Like, can you talk about your politics with your family? Right? I know people say avoid the Thanksgiving Day conversations, but I think that's the real test. Can you talk about your socialist politics, your um, pro-Palestine politics with those folks, right? With people who made you, and the people who you're connected to through work and your neighborhood and everywhere else. So we got to get there. I don't think we're there yet.
Well, we have gotten to it.